Ready to another edition of Math Lessons. Today we're going to focus on Unit 6, Lesson 9, which shows us how to divide a decimal by another decimal. So here on the screen I have the problem 28 and 14/100ths divided by 1 and 2/10ths. This is actually a really easy problem to do, and let me show you exactly how we set it up. So first things first, I want to take this problem and write it so that it is in my little division house, my little dog house. So I'm going to do 28.14 or 28 and 14/100ths, and I'm going to divide that by 1.2. Now, when you are dividing a decimal, you cannot divide a decimal by another decimal. And I know you might be saying, well, wait a minute, that's exactly what my problem is. I'm dividing a decimal by another decimal. Doesn't work that way. So what we need to do is we have to get rid of the decimal in our divisor. We can't have a decimal in our divisor, the number outside the doghouse, when we're working on decimal division. So here's what we have to do, and it's so simple. Here's what I want to do. I want to make this a whole number. So in order to make this a whole number, I need to get rid of that decimal. And in order to get rid of that decimal, I'm going to move it over to the end of my number. So I'm going to move my decimal over to the end of the number. And if I put it there, I end up with 12. So I would just have regular old 12. Now, whatever we do on the outside of the doghouse, the rule is we have to do the same thing on the inside of the doghouse. So for today's lesson, when you're dividing a decimal by the decimal, what you want to do is you want to start by moving the decimal in the divisor to the end, so you now have a whole number. Then what you want to do is count the number of times that you moved that decimal to the end to get rid of it. So here I moved it 1 time. And then what I need to do is even it out. Since I made this 10 times bigger, I moved that decimal 1 place, which is 10 times bigger. I need to move this decimal 1 place, which makes it 10 times bigger. So now they're even. Moved it once here. Now I need to move it once here. That's it. That's all you have to do. And then you can divide your decimal just like we learned in lesson 8, dividing a decimal by a whole number. So now if I move that decimal in 1.2, I end up with 12, and I end up with 281 divided by 281.4. So I'm going to do 281.4 divided by 12. That's what we talked about in lesson 8. Super easy. Follow the same steps. I start by putting my decimal up at the top, float it up to the top, and now I'm going to do regular old division. 12 knocks on the door, 2 answers. I can't take 12 away from 2, so I put a 0 above it. Now I can pick up that 8, and I can do 28. 12, I can take that away from 28 2 times. If I multiply that, that gives me 24. If I subtract, I get 4. When I compare, 4 is less than 12, so I can bring down my 1. Now be careful, that 1 is now before the decimal. So when I do my division, how many times I can take 41 or 12 away from 41, I have to put my answer before the decimal. So remember that we need to make sure we're lining up our decimal and lining up our quotients properly. Now, I want to figure out how many times I can take 12 away from 41. Well, I know 12 times 4 is 48, so that's too big. So let's try 12 times 3, and this is where the comparing comes in handy. 12 times 3 is 36. If I subtract, I'm left with 5. That's perfect because 12 is less than 5, so I'm good to go. And now I can bring down my 4. Now I'm going to do 54 and how many times I can take 12 away. Again, I know that 12 times 4 is 48. That's pretty close to 54, so I'm going to put 4 and see if that works. Now remember, because my 4 comes after the decimal, my 4 in 281 and 4/10ths, I need to make sure that I write my quotient after the decimal as well. So remember, we need to make sure we're lining everything up. Now I can multiply, and I get 48. If I subtract, I end up with 6. Now, if I look, I have no other numbers in 281 and 4/10, but I can't have a remainder when I'm dividing decimals. You cannot have a remainder when you're working with decimals. You just have to keep dividing until you end up with 0. So what I need to do is I remember that there's actually invisible zeros after the end of a decimal. They go on forever and ever and ever and ever. So I'm going to take one of those invisible zeros and I'm going to add that to my 6, the end of my 6, so that I now have a number that I can divide by 12. 60 divided by 12 happens to work out perfectly. It equals 5. And that leaves me with nothing left over. Once my remainder is 0, I'm done. So my answer is 23 and 45/100. This is really simple. Dividing a decimal by a decimal, the first thing you need to remember is to get rid of your decimal in your divisor by moving it to the right. And then you're going to move the number in the dividend, move the decimal the same number of places to the right in the dividend. Really easy. Let's practice another one. So